Jackson was just another mechanic in a dusty, forgotten corner of the galaxy. He spent his days repairing old ships and machines for a small mining colony on the edge of a desolate desert planet. His life was simple, boring even, but it was all he knew. There was nothing exciting about the work, but it paid the bills. The colony was isolated, far from the bustling spaceports and crowded planets where real action took place. Yet, Jackson had always felt something pulling at him, as if the universe had a bigger plan, though he could never imagine what it could be. One evening, while out on a routine check of the colony's communications array, Jackson noticed something strange. His attention was drawn to a faint, flickering signal on his monitor. It was weak and scrambled, but unmistakable. A distress signal. At first, he thought it was a glitch, just static. But then a shape appeared in the sky, barely visible against the darkening horizon. His heart skipped a beat. It was a ship, a large one, hurtling toward the surface. The craft was falling fast, its engines sputtering as it lost control. Jackson's instincts kicked in, and without a second thought, he sprinted to his old transport vehicle. He knew there was no time to wait for help. By the time anyone on the colony would respond, it would be too late. He had to act now. He pushed the throttle to its limit, racing toward the crash site. The ship, a sleek, silver vessel unlike anything he had ever seen, slammed into the desert ground with a deafening crash. The ground shook beneath him as he skidded to a stop, the dust rising in a thick cloud. The ship was a wreck, its hull cracked open in several places. Flames leaped from the damaged engines, but Jackson couldn't wait. He had to get inside. He knew there could be survivors, and if there were, they might need help. With no time to waste, he grabbed his fire extinguisher and climbed through the debris, searching for any sign of life. It didn't take long to find her. Amid the twisted metal, there was a figure lying unconscious in the wreckage. At first, Jackson thought it was a man, but when he moved closer, he saw the unmistakable features of an alien, a woman with pale, almost glowing skin and long silver hair. Her clothes were tattered, her body bruised and battered, but it was the faint pulse of life that made him hesitate. She was alive, barely. He knelt beside her, his heart racing. The ship's explosion had left the area dangerously unstable, and there was no telling how long the wreck would stay intact. He had to get her out of here. Jackson carefully lifted her into his arms, wincing as he felt the weight of her body. She was light, fragile, almost too delicate for someone who had clearly been through something traumatic. Her eyes fluttered open for a brief moment, but they were glazed with confusion, unable to focus on him. "Hey," Jackson whispered, trying to keep his voice calm. "You're safe now. I've got you." She didn't respond, her head lolling against his shoulder. Jackson knew there was no time to waste. He needed to get her back to the colony, to get her medical help. He ran back to his transport, careful not to jar her too much, and tossed her gently onto the seat. He jumped into the driver's seat and sped off toward the colony. The wind howled through the open window, but Jackson's thoughts were solely focused on her. What kind of alien was she? And what had happened to her ship? The questions buzzed in his mind, but all he could do was keep driving. As the transport approached the colony, he saw the familiar lights in the distance. His heart sank. The medics wouldn't be able to help her. The colony was small, under-equipped, and isolated. They barely had enough resources to care for the miners, let alone an alien from another world. But when he reached the colony, something strange happened. The woman, this alien Empress, he was sure of it now, stirred in her seat. She groaned, her eyes opening wider this time, though she seemed to struggle to make sense of her surroundings. Jackson pulled the transport to a halt and quickly ran around to her side. "You're safe now," he repeated, feeling a sense of urgency. "We need to get you inside." She looked at him, and for a moment there was a flicker of recognition. Her eyes narrowed slightly, but she didn't speak. She couldn't. Her voice was hoarse, strained. "Still The silence between them felt heavy, as if she were trying to say something but couldn't find the words. Jackson could sense it. He didn't know who she was or where she came from, but he knew one thing for sure. She wasn't just any alien. When he helped her to her feet, her slender frame trembled, and she barely had the strength to walk. Jackson's mind raced. What had happened to her ship? Why had it crashed? Was she the only survivor? Inside the colony, the lights flickered above, and the walls felt closer than ever. The medics rushed to help, though Jackson could tell they were as uncertain about what to do as he was. They had never treated an alien before, and it was clear they were unsure how to proceed. Jackson stayed by her side as she was placed on an operating table, the medical team working on her with precision and care. His mind was still reeling from the encounter, but now there was a new thought that kept pushing its way to the surface. Why had he saved her? Why risk his life and the safety of his colony for someone who could have been a threat?
He didn't have an answer.
All he knew was that he couldn't leave her to die in the desert, even though he didn't understand her. Even though he didn't know what this encounter meant, he felt something deep inside. A pull, a connection. It was as if fate had chosen him for this moment. The woman, the alien Empress, drifted in and out of consciousness, her eyes meeting his for brief seconds, and every time she seemed to ask a question with her gaze, one Jackson didn't have the answer to. Who was she? And why had he saved her? The hours passed slowly in the sterile, white-lit medical room. Jackson sat by the alien woman's side, his fingers tapping nervously against the edge of the table. The medics had done their best to stabilize her, but the unknowns still weighed heavily on him. Who was she? Where had she come from? And why did he feel so responsible for her? Her ship had been in pieces, but he couldn't help but wonder if it had been a deliberate attack. The crash wasn't a random incident. There had been signs of an explosion, a deep gash in the hull. Someone had been chasing her. Someone wanted her dead. Jackson couldn't help but feel a deep anger at the thought. Why would anyone want to harm her? She was just a stranger to him, an alien he had never met before, but she had a presence that made him feel protective, like he had to ensure her safety at all costs. Her eyes fluttered open again, and Jackson's heart skipped a beat. The silver-haired woman's gaze was more focused this time, her breathing slow and steady. She was regaining consciousness. "Are you all right?" Jackson asked, his voice soft. He wasn't sure if she could understand him, but the way she had looked at him earlier told him she wasn't completely out of it. She had seen him, even if she hadn't spoken. For a moment, the alien Empress didn't respond. Instead, she raised her hand weakly, touching the side of her head as though trying to make sense of her surroundings. Jackson watched, his brow furrowing in concern. What was she thinking? Then, slowly, her lips parted. The voice that came out was raspy, strained, and a little foreign, but it was undeniably human. "Where am I?" she whispered, barely audible. Jackson leaned closer. "You're in my colony, on the planet Vora. You crashed here, and I helped get you out of the wreckage. You've been unconscious for a while." The woman blinked, clearly trying to process his words. Her mind seemed to be working through the fog of confusion, piecing together the fragments of what had happened. Her fingers clenched the edge of the table, and Jackson could see the intensity in her gaze. She was no longer just a helpless, fragile being. There was something fierce in her eyes, something that reminded him that this was no ordinary woman. "I remember," she muttered, her voice growing slightly stronger. "The ship. It was attacked." Jackson's heart raced. He hadn't expected her to remember so much. He sat up straighter, his curiosity now fully piqued. "Attacked? By who?" The alien woman's expression darkened, her eyes narrowing as though she was recalling the events with painful clarity. "Enemies!" she said quietly, her tone full of quiet venom. "They were waiting for me. My enemies. They've been hunting me. Jackson didn't know what to make of her words. Enemies? Who would hunt an empress like her? She didn't look like someone who had been leading an army or ruling a galaxy. She looked like a frightened woman who had barely escaped with her life. And yet, there was an undeniable strength in her, something that didn't match the vulnerability she showed. Why? Jackson asked, almost without thinking. Why would they attack you? The woman closed her eyes briefly, as if fighting the urge to collapse under the weight of her memories. When she opened them again, there was a trace of sadness in her expression. I am not just any empress, she said, almost in a whisper. I am the ruler of the Dalkhan Empire, and my enemies, they want control. They want my throne. Jackson's mind raced. He had never heard of the Dalkhan Empire, and given the isolation of this colony, he doubted anyone else had either. This was all new to him, far beyond the limits of what he understood. But why come to Vora? He asked, still trying to piece things together. Why here? The woman sighed deeply, her gaze distant as though the memories were too much to bear. I was fleeing. I didn't want to lead them to my people. I didn't want them to destroy my home. So I hid. I've left everything behind. Jackson could hear the grief in her voice. She wasn't just talking about a throne or an empire. She was talking about everything she had lost. Her home, her family, her entire life. For a moment, the silence between them felt thick, charged with all the unsaid words that lingered in the air. Jackson wasn't sure what to say. He wanted to comfort her, but he didn't even know what she needed. Finally, he broke the silence. I'm sorry. I didn't know who you were when I found you. I thought you were just another survivor. The woman met his gaze, and for the first time, Jackson saw a flicker of something like gratitude in her eyes.
You saved my life, human. You had no reason to. You could have just left me to die, but you didn't.
I don't know why you did it, but I'm alive because of you. Jackson felt a knot tighten in his chest. Her words were simple, but they carried so much weight. He didn't know why he had saved her. Maybe it was because she was in need. Maybe it was because he couldn't ignore the pain in her eyes when he found her. Whatever the reason, it felt like something bigger than just a random act of kindness. It felt like fate. Why did I save you? He repeated softly, his voice almost to himself. I don't know. I just couldn't leave you out there. I couldn't let you die.
You!
You seemed like someone important, like you had a purpose. The woman studied him closely. And now you are tangled in my fate, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I am an empress without a throne, a ruler without a kingdom, and you, human, have chosen to save me. To protect me. Jackson wasn't sure if she meant it as a question or a statement. Either way, the weight of her words hung in the air. He had never imagined that a single act could change his life so drastically, but it had. For the next few days, Jackson stayed close to the Empress. He helped the medical team as they continued to treat her, though it was clear that her recovery was slow. Her body was healing, but her mind was burdened with the pain of her past and the fear of what was to come. One evening, as he sat beside her in the quiet of the medical room, she turned to him, her silver hair spilling over the edge of the bed.
Why did you save me, human? She asked again, her voice filled with something new. Curiosity, uncertainty, and maybe even a little bit of hope.
Jackson glanced at her, the question still lingering in the air. He didn't have an answer. But as he looked into her eyes, he realized that maybe it didn't matter. The answer would come in time. For now, all he knew was that he couldn't turn his back on her. He couldn't walk away. Not when she needed him most. Not when the entire galaxy might come after her. And so Jackson remained by her side, knowing that whatever happened next, he had made a choice to protect the alien Empress who had found her way into his life. But as the days passed and the Empress healed, Jackson couldn't help but wonder what his future would look like. He had saved her, but what did that mean for him? And what kind of life would they lead now that their fates were linked? The answers were still out of reach, but he knew one thing for sure. Life would never be the same again. Days turned into weeks, and the more Jackson stayed at the colony, the more he became entwined in the alien Empress's life. The people of the colony, once curious and wary of the strange woman, had slowly accepted her presence. They didn't know who she was, but they could see the recovery in her, the strength beginning to return to her eyes. Even in her weakened state, she radiated power. It was clear that she was no ordinary alien, no mere survivor. But as much as Jackson tried to focus on his work, there was always this pull, a pull toward her. Each day, he found himself spending more time with her, helping her with simple tasks as she slowly regained her strength. Sometimes they would sit together in the colony's small garden, watching the twin suns set over the horizon. Other times they would talk about the Dalkan Empire, about her enemies, about the lonely years she had spent on the run. She told him stories of her world, of the empire she had once ruled with great power. She spoke of the elaborate palaces and the bustling cities. She described the life that felt so far removed from the dusty, barren world of Vora. Jackson found it hard to imagine such a grand existence, so different from the harsh reality of his own life. He would listen, transfixed by her words. She spoke with such passion, as though every memory held its own weight, its own significance, and in return, he shared his own life, his past, his years as a mechanic on this desolate planet. He told her of the quiet existence he had carved for himself, away from the chaos of the larger galaxy. Yet, every conversation, every shared moment, felt like a thread slowly tying them together. There was something more between them now, something unspoken but deeply felt. Jackson didn't know if it was fate or simply the inevitable result of spending so much time together, but the bond that had begun in the wreckage of her ship had only deepened. But despite their growing closeness, Jackson could still sense the tension in the air. It was there, lingering in the moments when their eyes met, when their hands brushed. There were things they both wanted to say, but neither of them had the courage to voice them. One evening, as the colony lay silent under the vast sky, Jackson found himself walking along the edge of the cliffs overlooking the desert. The cool evening wind brushed against his skin, and the stars above seemed to stretch endlessly, far beyond anything he had ever seen. He needed space, time, to think. His feelings for her were confusing, but they were undeniable. He was no fool. He knew that he was falling for her, just as she had begun to rely on him. It had started with the simplest of acts, the decision to help an injured woman. But now, as he stood in the vast silence of the desert, he knew that it had turned into something more. Jackson didn't know how it had happened. It wasn't as if he had set out to fall for her. She was an Empress, an alien, and their worlds could never truly align. The differences between them were impossible to ignore, and yet there was something in her that called to him, something deep and raw that reached beyond her title and her past. Jackson? He turned to find her standing just a few paces behind him. Her silhouette was framed by the soft glow of the twin suns setting on the horizon, casting a warm light on her silver hair and the fine, delicate features of her face. For a moment she looked almost ethereal, like she belonged to another world, a world that Jackson could never fully understand. He cleared his throat, his voice rough. I didn't mean to wander off like that. Just needed some air. She nodded, her gaze steady.
I understand.
Sometimes I, too, need to be alone with my thoughts. There was a long silence between them. Jackson felt the weight of her words, the unspoken understanding that passed between them. She too was struggling with the burden of her past, of her empire's fall. And Jackson, well, he had never imagined that his life would become so tangled in the fate of an alien empress.
"I owe you my life," she said quietly, her voice carrying the weight of years of hardship. "I don't think I've ever truly thanked you for saving me."
You didn't have to. You could have left me there.
Jackson glanced at her, his expression softening. "You don't need to thank me."
I couldn't leave you. Not when I saw you. She stepped closer, her presence both comforting and overwhelming. The night air seemed to shift around them, and for a brief moment, Jackson felt as though the world had narrowed to just the two of them. "You saved me," she continued, her voice almost inaudible. "But now, I am the one who needs to save you." Jackson blinked in surprise. Save me? From what? 9 large searching his. Pair eyes searching his. From yourself. Jackson felt his heart rate quicken. There was something in her gaze, something he couldn't quite place, but it sent a shiver down his spine. Her words were not just a statement. They were an invitation, a challenge. "I've seen the way you look at me," she said softly.
I see the way you care, but you fear what that means. You fear what will happen if you let yourself care too much. Jackson opened his mouth to speak, but no words came.
She was right. He had been afraid of what might happen if he allowed himself to get too close to her. "I didn't ask for this," he finally managed to say. "I didn't ask to get involved with you. But now that I am, I don't know what comes next." She nodded, her expression thoughtful. "Neither do I. But I can't ignore what's between us, Jackson. I can't pretend that what happened wasn't real." He swallowed, his mind racing. "What are you saying?" She stepped closer, her eyes never leaving his. "I'm saying that whatever comes next, we face it together. If you'll have me." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Jackson could feel the heat of her presence, the unspoken promise in her gaze. He didn't know what the future held, but in that moment, he realized that he couldn't turn away. Not from her, not from whatever this was.
I don't know what this is,
Jackson said, his voice rough. "But I'm willing to find out." The alien Empress smiled then, a soft, knowing smile that reached her eyes. "Then we begin, Jackson," together. In that moment, the future seemed less uncertain. The galaxy was still vast and full of dangers, and the shadows of her enemies loomed on the horizon. But in that instant, as the two of them stood together under the stars, there was only the promise of what might be. They didn't need to say anything more. The quiet understanding between them was enough. Whatever the galaxy had in store, they would face it together. And for the first time since their fates had collided, Jackson didn't feel so alone. Time passed, and the days in the colony became less about survival and more about planning, about moving forward. Jackson had thought his life would go back to the quiet monotony he had always known, but he couldn't shake the feeling that things had changed forever. The alien Empress had come into his life, and with her presence, she had pulled him into a world far beyond the scope of his own. Queen Lyra. She was no longer just a stranger in need of help. She was someone Jackson found himself deeply connected to, though he couldn't yet understand why. He had thought he was saving her, but now, as they stood side by side, he wondered if perhaps she had saved him in ways he could not yet articulate. The colony had adapted too. The people who had once whispered about her arrival, unsure of what to make of her, had slowly warmed to her presence. She had become a part of their lives, not just the mysterious alien Empress, but someone who had shared their struggle for survival on this lonely planet. In the quiet hours of the day, Jackson found himself drawn to her once again, finding solace in her company. even when words were few. But the lingering threat of her enemies never truly left. There was always the possibility that they might come for her, come for both of them, and that thought hung in the back of Jackson's mind. Lyra had made it clear that her enemies were relentless, powerful forces that would stop at nothing to reclaim their hold over her. Jackson didn't know who they were or what kind of threat they posed, but he knew one thing for sure: he wouldn't let them take her. One evening, as the stars above the desert flickered like diamonds in the sky, Jackson and Lyra sat in the small garden near the colony's edge. It was a quiet place, far from the busy areas of the colony where the workers labored and the machines hummed. Here, it was just the two of them, surrounded by the vast expanse of desert. The quiet was soothing, but tonight there was a sense of unease in the air. Jackson could feel it in the way Lyra's gaze kept drifting toward the horizon, as if she could sense something coming. He didn't ask, but he knew she was thinking of her enemies. She had been for weeks. "You're still worried about them, aren't you?" Jackson finally asked, breaking the silence. Lyra nodded slowly, her fingers tracing the outline of a small flower that had bloomed in the garden. "They won't stop. I can feel them. I can feel their presence, even from far away."
They're out there, Jackson, watching.
Jackson's heart tightened. He had never seen her so vulnerable, so unsure. For all her strength, for all her power, she was still a woman trapped in a game she couldn't control. She had been an empress, a ruler with vast authority, and now she was reduced to hiding in a small colony on the edge of nowhere. "I won't let them hurt you," Jackson said firmly, his voice steady. "No matter what comes, I'm not going to let them take you. We'll fight." Lyra turned to him, her eyes meeting his with an intensity that made his chest tighten. "It's not just about fighting, Jackson. It's about surviving. It's about finding a way to live in a galaxy that has turned against me."
Her words hung in the air, and Jackson could feel the weight of them.
She wasn't just worried about her life. She was worried about what kind of life she would have left if she was forced to keep running, forced to keep hiding from those who would see her dead. "I don't know how to live like this," she said softly, more to herself than to him. "I was a queen, a ruler. I had everything. Now I have nothing." Jackson reached out, placing his hand gently on hers. She stiffened for a moment, then relaxed, her fingers curling into his. They sat there for a long time, the sound of the wind shifting the sand around them, their fingers intertwined. "I'm not going anywhere," Jackson said, his voice steady. "I'll be here for you. Whatever happens, I'm with you." She turned her head slightly, her eyes softening as she looked at him. "I don't deserve your loyalty. I don't deserve your help." Jackson shook his head.
You don't have to deserve anything. I made a choice, Lyra.
"I saved you because it was the right thing to do, and I'm not going to leave you now." The words seemed to comfort her, but there was still a shadow in her eyes, a lingering fear she couldn't quite shake off. It wasn't just about the enemies coming for her. It was about something deeper. She had lost so much, and now the threat of losing more was more than she could bear. "We'll figure this out," Jackson continued, his voice full of quiet resolve. "We'll find a way to make it work." And then, as if a weight had been lifted from her shoulders, Lyra finally smiled. It wasn't a wide, joyful smile, but it was enough to let Jackson know that, for the first time in weeks, she believed him. "I hope you're right," she said, squeezing his hand. That night, as they returned to the small quarters they shared in the colony, Jackson felt something shift between them. It wasn't just the promise of safety. It was something deeper, something that had been growing quietly for weeks, unnoticed, until now. There was a bond between them, one forged in the fires of survival, and Jackson realized that he had grown to care for this woman in a way that he couldn't explain. He wasn't sure what the future held, but he knew that he couldn't turn away from her. She wasn't just the alien Empress who had crashed on his planet. She was the woman who had become a part of his life, and now he couldn't imagine living without her. The next few days passed in a blur. They worked together to reinforce the colony's defenses, preparing for any potential attack. Lyra's enemies were still out there, and Jackson knew that they had to be ready. But even as they prepared for the worst, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was changing. There was an unspoken tension between them, a question that hung in the air. The more they worked together, the more Jackson found himself thinking about her. It wasn't just gratitude anymore. It was something more, something that felt like it had always been there, waiting for him to recognize it. One evening, as they sat together in the small living quarters, Lyra turned to him with a serious expression on her face. "Jackson," she began softly, "I need to ask you something." He looked up, startled by the sudden change in her tone. "What is it?" She hesitated for a moment, her gaze drifting away from him.
If it comes down to it, if they come for me,
"Ooh. You fight for me?" Jackson didn't hesitate. He took her hand in his and looked her in the eye. "I'll fight. I'll do whatever it takes."
I'm with you, Lyra. For the first time in weeks, she seemed to relax, a soft breath escaping her lips.
"Thank you," she whispered. Jackson leaned forward slightly, his voice low. "You don't have to thank me. I told you I'm not going anywhere." And as the days went on, Jackson realized that the question he had been avoiding had already been answered. He was in this for the long haul. Whatever the galaxy threw their way, whatever enemies came after her, he would stand by her side. In that moment, Jackson knew that he had made his choice. He had saved her not just because it was the right thing to do, but because she had become a part of his world. And now, whatever the future held, they would face it together.